The blind alpha of the Storm Riders pack was given a mute servant, but he whispered mate when he touched her scar. What happened next would unearth a betrayal that had rotted his pack from within. Alpha Theron, blinded by an attack that supposedly killed his fated mate, was a beast of grief, caged in a world of darkness. And Isolde, the servant, was the ghost hiding in his den, her silence a cage, her scars a map to the truth. She had survived the fire that should have claimed her. But now, she was being forced to serve the one man who could expose her, or save them both. Chapter 1. The Bitter Alpha. The world had shrunk to the four walls of his study, and Alpha Theron hated it. He hated the predictable tick-tock of the grand clock in the corner, a sound that did nothing but measure the endless, lightless hours. He hated the scuffling, terrified footsteps of the servants who skirted his door, their fear a sour spike in the air. Most of all, he hated the scent of his own grief, a stale, unwashed odor that clung to him, mingling with the scent of beeswax polish on the desk he could no longer use, and the old paper smell of books he could no longer read. His blindness was a prison, 1 year old and built to last. A year since the rogue attack, a year since the fire, a year since Isolde. He slammed his fist on the desk, the impact vibrating up his arm. His wolf, a great silver beast that had once run the forests, was now just a dormant, aching thing, as blind and broken as he was. Without its mate, its other half, it had no will to surface. Shuffle, shuffle, scrape. "Who's there?" he snarled. The air in the hallway pulsed with that familiar weak scent of terror. The shuffling stopped. A moment of silence, then a heavy, confident tread approached. Thump, thump, thump. His beta Alden, the scent of pine and leather. "Alpha," Alden said, his voice practical, devoid of the pity Theron loathed. "What?" "Your attendant, Lyra. She quit." Theron let out a humorless laugh. "Did I finally throw something that connected?" "A book," Alden confirmed. "She said you've become impossible. A monster." "Good. Then leave me to my monstrous state." Theron turned his head toward the window, feeling the faint warmth of a sun he couldn't see. Despair was a cold, heavy cloak, and he was sinking into its folds. "I can't do that, Theron. The pack needs even a shadow of a leader. You need to be cared for. Washed. Fed. I am not a pup." "You're acting like one," Alden shot back, one of the few who dared. "I've assigned a new attendant. She's been informed of the risks." Theron just grunted. "Another simpering girl who will be gone by nightfall." "I doubt it," Alden said. He was already at the door. "I've assigned a mute drudge from the kitchens. She's scarred, used to hardship, and at the very least, she won't bother you with inane chatter." The door clicked shut. Alden was gone. A mute? For a moment, Theron felt a sliver of something other than rage. Relief. Blessed, absolute silence. Chapter 2. The Mute Servant. Isolde's world had shrunk to the four walls of the fortress kitchens, and she was terrified. For a year she had been Noelle. Noelle the kitchen drudge. Noelle the mute. Noelle, whose face was a ruin of scar tissue on one side, whose throat was a latticework of raised, ropey flesh, and whose past was a complete unknown. It was the perfect cover. She scrubbed pots until her hands were raw, the lye-soaked, rough-spun fabric of her servant's dress a constant, itching reminder of her new station. She kept her eyes down. She never made a sound. She was invisible. It was the only way to stay alive. She had survived. The fire, the magic, the blades. She had survived. She remembered the crackle of flames, the smell of her own burning hair, and a voice. A cold, cultured voice giving the order, "Make sure she is silent. Permanently." And then Magnus, Theron's uncle, his most trusted advisor, his face illuminated by the fire, watching as she was mutilated. She had crawled from the ashes, her vocal cords shredded, her body a testament to agony. She had healed slowly, painfully, hiding in the woods before slipping back into the fortress under the guise of a refugee, a mute orphan of some border skirmish. And now, they were sending her to him. The head cook, a sharp-tongued woman named Corinna, shoved her forward. "Beta's orders. You're to attend the Alpha. Don't get anything thrown at you, girl, and don't you dare try to steal." Isolde's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it would break free. No, not him. Anyone but him. It wasn't him she feared. It was herself. She was terrified for him. If Magnus, her attacker, her hunter, realized she was alive, realized she was right under his nose, he would finish the job. And he would kill Theron too, for being the one thing that still tied her to this life. Alden met her at the top of the servants' stairs. He didn't look at her face. No one ever did. He's in there. He's difficult. Just bring him his tea, get him to eat, and stay out of his way. He pushed her toward the massive oak doors of the Alpha's study. She could smell it from here, the stale air, and underneath, the faint, beloved scent of pine and winter that was uniquely, heartbreakingly Theron. Her hand, chapped and red, trembled as she raised it to knock. She couldn't do it. The door swung open. Alden, impatient. He's waiting. He didn't pull her. He simply stepped aside and pushed her forward, forcing her into the darkness of the lion's den. The door clicked shut behind her. A death knell. Chapter 3. The Scar. Theron smelled her before he heard her. She was a strange, contradictory assault on his senses. The base scent was lye, potato peels, and the coarse milled soap of the kitchens. But beneath that, stirring a memory so deep and painful it made his heart stumble in his chest, was the scent of wildflowers and ash. Isolde, his mate. The scent he had fallen asleep to every night of his adult life. The scent he had last smelled on a burning pyre of oak and magic. "Get out!" he roared, his chair crashing backward as he stood. His wolf surged, a confused, agonized howl echoing in his chest. "Get out! Who sent you? What is this trick?" He heard her gasp, a silent, hitching breath, and then the overwhelming, cloying smell of her terror. It was pure, unadulterated panic, so strong it choked the air. Crash! The sound of porcelain shattering on stone. She had dropped the tray. Hot tea splashed, and he heard her hiss, again, silent, just a sharp intake of air. "A cruel joke!" he seethed, stalking toward the sound, his hands outstretched. "To send a wench here smelling like my dead mate, to—" She was scrambling backward, her movements frantic. He smelled the tea, smelled her fear, and he lunged, not to hurt, to seize, to know. He caught her arm. The fabric of her sleeve was rough, wet with tea. He grabbed her, his fingers biting into her flesh. She tried to pull away, a small, desperate animal, and then his fingers slid from the fabric to the skin of her forearm. His world, already dark, simply stopped. His breath caught. His heart, which had felt like a stone for a year, gave a single, painful lurch. His fingers, made hypersensitive by his blindness, traced a map he knew better than his own. A raised, jagged, crescent-shaped scar. He had given it to her. They were pups, climbing the high rocks, and she had slipped. His claws, not yet under his control, had raked her arm as he caught her. He had cried harder than she had. He had traced that scar every night for 15 years. It was impossible. It was buried. It was ash. But it was here, under his hand. His voice, when it came, was not a roar. It was a broken, disbelieving whisper that tore from his throat. "Mate." Chapter 4. The Revelation. Isolde's blood turned to ice. That single word, mate. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. A word of possession, of recognition, that vibrated through her skin and into her very soul. She yanked her arm back with all her strength, stumbling over the broken pieces of the teacup. He knows. He knows. He knows. How? How could he know? He was blind. She scrambled backward on her hands and knees, crab-walking away, her mind a high-pitched scream. This was wrong. This was dangerous. He couldn't know. If he knew, he would say it, he would roar it. And Magnus would hear. Magnus would know. "Who are you?" he snarled, lunging again, but this time he was following her scent. He was a bloodhound, and she was the fox. He caught her again, his large hands clamping down on her shoulders. "Speak!" He shook her, his grief and rage and confusion boiling over. "Speak to me!" She couldn't. She opened her mouth, a silent, desperate O of pain. She was mute. He was blind. This was a nightmare. Theron felt her small body trembling under his grip. He smelled her terror, and it was so profound, so pure, it cut through his rage. This wasn't the fear of a servant, this was the fear of a ghost. "Why?" he whispered, his grip gentling. "Why do you smell like her? Why do you have her scar?" She was desperate. She had to make him understand. She had to make him see. Breaking free, she lunged, not for the door, but for the one thing in the room that held any light. The hearth. The fire was low, just glowing coals, but next to it was a small, discarded piece of charcoal. She grabbed it. "What are you doing?" Theron snapped, turning his head, hearing the frantic scrape. She ignored him. She scrambled to the smooth, flat stones of the hearth, her hand shaking so badly the first line was a jagged mess. He heard the writing, the scrape, scrape, scrape of the charcoal on stone. It was the only sound in the room besides their breathing. "What is that? What are you writing?" He took a step, his foot hitting the broken tray. He was disoriented. Isolde knew she had one chance. She dropped the charcoal, crawled to him, and grabbed his hand, his big, calloused, scarred hand. He flinched, but she held on, dragging him, pulling him down to his knees on the hearth. Then she forced his fingers onto the stone. He went still. His hand, so much larger than hers, began to trace the rough letters she had carved. One by one. I-S-O-L-D-E. Isolde. Chapter 5. The Reunion. The name felt through his fingertips, shattered Theron's world. It was not a dream. It was not a trick. It was not a ghost. It was stone. It was charcoal. It was real. Isolde, he breathed. He said her name, and the sound of it in the room after a year of silence felt like a resurrection. He turned, fumbling, his hands finding her shoulders, her arms, her face. He pulled her to him, crushing her against his chest, his nose buried in her hair. It was her. Wildflowers and ash. Lye and potatoes, yes, but underneath, it was her. She was small, so much thinner than he remembered. He could feel her ribs, the sharp, bird-like bones of her shoulders. But she was solid. She was warm. "You're alive," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're alive." His hands, hungry for information, flew over her. He mapped her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones, her jaw, and he stopped. The right side of her face. It wasn't smooth. It was a landscape of pain. Raised, jagged scars, one pulling at the corner of her mouth, another stretching from her temple to her jaw. He moved to her neck, his touch frantic. More. Thick, ropey scars that covered her throat, explaining her silence. This was not just his Isolde. This was a survivor. The joy, so pure and bright it had almost blinded him more than the fire, was instantly eclipsed by a white-hot, possessive rage. His wolf, dormant for so long, surged with a killing intent. This was no rogue attack, this was an execution, an assassination. And it had failed. He pulled back, his hands framing her scarred face. "Who?" he growled, the single word a promise of death. "What?" He could barely form the question. "Who did this to us?" Isolde's hands, still black with charcoal dust, came up to cover his. She shook her head, her eyes wide with a warning. She pulled one of his hands away, held it to her lips, and then pulled back, scrambling for the charcoal again. This time her hand was steadier. She wrote. He traced the letters. S. till here. Chapter 6. The Secret Alliance. Still here. The two words were a death knell. The traitor. The one who had tried to murder his mate and blinded him. The one who had watched his pack grieve. The one who had stood by his side, offering condolences. That person was still in the fortress. The truth of it settled on Theron like a shroud. He leaned back, his mind racing, connecting dots he had been too blind, too grieved to see. The rogue patrol, conveniently late. The magical wards on their chambers inexplicably failing. The search party, led by Magnus, that found unidentifiable remains. He had been a fool. A blind, broken fool. Isolde watched him, her heart aching. She could see the storm in his face, the clenching of his jaw, the way his hands curled into fists. He was processing. She crawled to him, her movements no longer frantic, but deliberate. She took his large, calloused hand. Gently, she guided his fingers to the crescent scar on her arm, the one he had recognized. Us, she thought. Then, her movements slow, she brought his hand to his own chest. His tunic was unlaced, a habit he'd picked up since he could no longer bear to be constrained. She slipped her fingers beneath the fabric and laid his hand flat against his own skin, just over his heart. There, just as prominent on him as it was on her, was a matching scar. Not from a childhood fall, but from the fire. A brand of magic and malice, a jagged, angry mark that had burned itself onto him the moment her wards had broken. He flinched, his own fingers tracing it. They were linked, by fate, and now, by this shared brutal mark of survival. A year, he whispered, his voice thick. You've been here, hiding. She nodded, though he couldn't see. She simply squeezed his hand. He doesn't know you're alive. It wasn't a question. She shook her head, then squeezed his hand again. No, he thinks I am weak, a broken alpha, and you are a mute servant. A grim, terrible smile touched his lips. It's a cruel joke. He stood, pulling her up with him. No, it's a weapon. He left me my ears, he left me my nose, and he left me you. He was Theron again, not the broken beast, the alpha. And in that moment of grim, shared determination, they heard it. Knock, knock, knock. A firm, familiar, confident rap on the door. Isolde's body went rigid. Theron's blood froze. A voice, smooth as oiled leather, called through the wood. Theron, is everything all right? I heard a crash. It was Magnus. Chapter 7. The First Test. Theron's reaction was instantaneous. He shoved Isolde hard toward the darkest corner of the room, into the shadowed alcove behind the heavy velvet curtains. Don't move. Don't breathe, he whispered, his voice a low command. He turned back to the room, composing his face into the familiar mask of bitter agitation. He heard her settle, the faint rustle of her rough dress, and then silence. Enter, he barked. The door opened. Theron tracked the sounds, the click of the latch, the two firm footsteps, the pause as the man surveyed the room. My goodness, Theron. The voice was a deep baritone, laced with feigned concern. Another tantrum? The scent of sandalwood and something sharp like cold steel and a struck flint filled the study. Magnus, his uncle, his mentor. Get out, Magnus, Theron growled, turning his back. I can't do that. I heard a crash, and this mess. Theron heard Magnus step further into the room, heard the crunch of porcelain under his boot. Ah, the new servant, the mute girl. Clumsy, I see. A bad choice, Alden, he mused as if to himself. I'm fine, Theron said, his voice flat. He was listening, not to the words, but to the sounds beneath them. Magnus's heartbeat was calm, steady, too steady for someone who had just walked in on his nephew in a seeming fit of rage. You are clearly not fine, my boy, Magnus said, his tone softening into the one Theron had heard so often this past year, the pitying, gentle one. You are pushing everyone away. Let me help you. I don't need your help. I need silence. Of course. Magnus was moving again, toward the door. Theron's shoulders untensed just slightly. But he stopped. Theron heard him stop, heard the faint, subtle shift of fabric, heard him inhale, a long, slow sniff of the air. Theron's heart hammered against his ribs. Did he smell her? Did he smell the ash and wildflowers? Did he smell her fear? Magnus was silent for a long, agonizing moment. Then he let out the breath. Just be careful who you trust, my friend, Magnus said, his voice casual again. Even the broken can be used as weapons. The door clicked shut. He was gone. Chapter 8. The Accusation. Isolde stumbled out from the curtains, her legs shaking so violently she could barely stand. She collapsed onto the small stool by the hearth, her body trembling in ragged, silent sobs. He knows, Theron whispered, his back still to the room. He smelled you. He didn't know what it was, but he smelled something. He turned, his blind eyes seeming to bore into her. What was that? Why did you react like that? Isolde was frantic. She couldn't breathe. That voice, the one from her nightmares, the one that had been laced with concern just now, but in her memory was cold, cold, cold. She lunged for the charcoal, her hands fumbling. What, Isolde, what? Theron demanded, his patience snapping. He was in denial. It couldn't be. Magnus? The man who had raised him after his father's death? The man who had held him as he grieved for her? Whose shoulder he had soaked with tears? It's not him, Theron said, his voice a plea. It can't be. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a terrible, desperate horror. She turned back to the hearth. The sound of the charcoal was not a scrape this time. It was an attack. Scrape, 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 an angry, vicious sound that clawed at the stone. What are you writing? He roared. She grabbed his hand, yanking him down again, shoving his fingers against the new letters. They were sloppy, carved with rage. I heard his voice. He traced them, his brow furrowed. Heard his voice? She carved again right below it. Heg of Theodor. Chapter 9. A New Language. Theron shattered. He wanted to roar, to tear the fortress down stone by stone, to find Magnus and rip the truth from his throat. But he was blind. His only witness was mute, and the traitor was his second in command, the most trusted man in the Storm Riders' pack. They were trapped. He's right, Theron whispered, sinking onto the bench beside her. Even the broken can be used as weapons, and we are the most broken of all. Isolde's hand found his. It was small, but her grip was strong. No, the grip said, not broken, waiting. He nodded, though he couldn't see her. You're right. We have to be smart. We need to communicate. Not like this. This was too slow, too public. He stood and moved to an old carved chest in the corner, his movements sure. This was his room. He knew it by heart. He lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and old leather wafted up. His hands sifted through old belongings. His first dagger, his father's cloak. Ah. He pulled out a small, worn leather bag that rattled. Here, he said, pouring the contents into her hands. Isolde looked down. Runes. Small, smooth river stones, each carved with a symbol. Touch. Her fingers ached with the familiarity. They had learned these as pups, a secret language just for them. Alpha, mate, danger, safe, love, fire, water. Her eyes filled with tears. He had kept them. He touched her hand. Do you remember? She nodded, then realized he couldn't see. She picked out a single stone, the one for love, and pressed it into his palm. He closed his hand around it, his expression softening for the first time. Good. His face hardened again. Now, tell me everything. For the next hour, she worked, her hands flying, arranging the stones on the smooth surface of the desk. He would sweep his hand over them, reading the sentence with his fingertips, his face growing darker with every revelation. Reversal. From the horror of the last chapter, a small, dangerous ember of hope was kindled. They had a language. She finished, her hands shaking from the effort. He swept his hand over the final, terrible message. The fire, he read aloud. It was magic. He is not alone. Chapter 10. The poison. Their new life began. Outwardly, nothing changed. Theron was the bitter alpha. Isolde was the mute servant. She brought him his food. She cleaned his chambers. She endured his fits of rage. But in the stolen moments, in the dead of night, they talked. The runestones became an extension of her, and his fingertips, her voice. Magnus visited often, his presence a suffocating cloak of feigned concern. Theron, you're not sleeping. You're wasting away, he said one morning, his voice thick with sympathy. I've brought someone, a new healer. She has remedies. He introduced a woman named Theodora. She was old, her scent was of dried herbs and something bitter. A tea, Alpha, Theodora rasped, offering him a cup. It will help you rest, ease your pain. Theron took the cup, his hand trembling in weakness. He brought it to his nose. The scent was chamomile, lavender, and a faint but unmistakable bitter almond. Wolfsbane. Aconite. Not enough to kill a shifter, but enough to weaken, to keep him docile, to slowly, surely poison him. With a roar of weakness, he accidentally backhanded the cup, sending it crashing against the wall. Get that filth away from me! I need no potions! Theodora clucked, unfazed. He is agitated, Lord Magnus. The sickness in his mind is strong. Clean it up, Magnus ordered, his voice sharp with annoyance. We will try again tomorrow. Reversal. The hope of the last chapter was dashed by a new, immediate danger. They weren't just waiting. They were being actively hunted. As Theodora knelt to clean the mess, her back was to the alcove where Isolde slept, on a small cot. Isolde peeked out, her blood running cold. She knew this woman. The face was older, but the eyes... the cold, dead eyes. She scrambled for her runes. That night, she showed Theron. She held me down. Chapter 11. Feigning weakness. Two traitors. Theron whispered, his hand clenching the runestone for danger. My uncle and my healer. A perfect, inescapable trap. We need to make them believe it's working, he continued. We need to make them believe I am weak, and you are irrelevant. Isolde hated the plan, but she knew it was necessary. She picked out the rune for agree. The next day, the performance began. Theron was to have his first public meal in the Great Hall since the attack. Magnus had insisted to show the pack their alpha indoors. It was a disaster, just as they'd planned. Theron was weak, confused. Isolde was at his side, guiding his hand to his cup. He missed, accidentally, knocking the goblet over, drenching the table. "You useless mute creature," he roared for all the hall to hear. "Can you do nothing right? Get out of my sight." He was loud. He was furious. He was broken. Isolde flinched, playing her part. She lowered her head in shame and fled the hall, the sound of the pack's pitying whispers following her. From the high table, Theron heard it. The soft, satisfied chuckle from Magnus as he spoke to Theodora. He smelled their satisfaction. It was working. They saw him as a lost cause, and her as less than nothing. Reversal. The calculated deception gave them a grim sense of control, a sharp contrast to the danger they'd felt. Later, in the privacy of his rooms, Isolde returned. She found him by the fire, his head in his hands. He had hit the table for show, and a long, sharp splinter was embedded in his palm. She said nothing. She simply fetched her medical supplies, the ones Theodora thought were for his baths, and knelt before him. She cleaned the wound, her touch so gentle. He was shaking, not from pain, but from the humiliation, from the rage it took to not kill them all. She finished, bandaging his hand. Her own hands lingered on his. He was still the alpha. Her mate. She hesitated, her heart aching for him. Then she leaned down and pressed a soft, warm, reverent kiss to his bandaged knuckles. Chapter 12. The Bond. The kiss was a lightning strike. It was not a kiss of passion, but of fealty, of love, of us against the world. And it was enough. Theron's dormant wolf, the great grieving beast that had been silent for a year, roared to life. It surged through his veins, a sudden shocking heat that made him gasp. He had been a man. Now, he was an alpha. He grabbed her, his movement so fast it was a blur, pulling her from the floor and onto his lap, his hand tangled in her hair, pulling her face to his. "Isolde," he groaned, and he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss of starvation. It was a year of grief, of darkness, of rage, of loss, all pouring into one desperate, claiming act. He tasted the salt of her skin, the faint, clean scent of the herbs she'd used, and underneath it all, her, wildflowers and ash, his mate. She gasped against his mouth, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders. She kissed him back, her own year of terror, of silence, of hiding, melting away. This was not the broken alpha. This was her Theron. The mate bond, a silver thread he had thought severed and burned to ash, flared to life. It was no longer a thread. It was a live wire, thrumming with power, with life, with a shared, burning purpose. He could feel her, her emotions, her fear, her strength. It was an anchor in his darkness. It was power. He broke the kiss, his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing hard. The passion was so thick it was a physical presence in the room. Reversal. The cold deception of the last chapter was consumed by white-hot passion and a rekindled bond. "He will fail," Theron growled, his voice a low vibration she felt in her chest. "He thinks me weak, but he's given me back my strength." He held her tighter. "He wants me to take a new mate, to secure the pack. He's bringing Lady Oriana of the Crescent Wolf Pack to the full moon." Chapter 13. The Bride. Lady Oriana arrived with the pomp and circumstance of a conquering queen. She was all grace, beauty, and shimmering silk. Her scent, however, arrived before she did. It was a cloying, heavy perfume of night-blooming jasmine and something metallic, like copper. It was designed to incite desire, but to Theron's hypersensitive nose, it burned. It was a mask. He met her in the great hall as custom demanded. Isolde was at his side, a silent, scarred shadow in her rough-spun dress, her hand on his arm to guide him. "Alpha Theron," Oriana's voice tinkled, like wind chimes. It was a practiced, false sound. "A tragedy what has befallen you. But the Storm Riders pack is strong. I am here to help you rebuild." Theron heard the lie. She wasn't here to help him. She was here to replace Isolde, to sit on the Luna's throne. "Lady Oriana," he said, his voice flat. She ran a perfectly manicured hand down his arm, her touch proprietary. "We will make you strong again. You simply need the right inspiration." Her hand stopped when it reached Isolde's, which was still resting on his elbow. Oriana paused. Theron felt the shift in the air, heard the subtle intake of her breath. "What?" she said, her voice no longer tinkling. "Is this?" "My attendant," Theron said. "A pathetic, scarred creature?" Oriana scoffed, her voice loud enough for the nearby council members to hear. "She smells of the kitchens. Have her sent back. Or better yet, put down. A blind alpha needs no more weakness around him." Reversal. The passion and power of their reunion was instantly chilled by a very public, very real threat. Isolde flinched, but not, Theron realized from the insult. She flinched in recognition. Chapter 14. The memory. That voice. That high, tinkling, false laugh. Isolde's blood ran cold. She wasn't just hearing the voice of a cruel noblewoman, she was hearing the voice from the fire. The memory, suppressed by trauma, roared to the surface. She wasn't just seeing the fire, she was in it. She's on the forest floor, her body broken. The fire is raging in their chambers, a pillar of supernatural flame. Magnus is standing over her. "It's done," he says. "He's blind and the wards are broken." And then, that laugh, that tinkling, wind chime laugh. "He's blind and she's finished," Lady Oriana's voice says. She's standing next to Magnus, her beautiful face illuminated by the flames, her expression one of pure, ecstatic triumph. "Such a pity she was so resilient." "Finish her," Magnus orders Theodora. "But the dagger first, the one I enchanted. I want him to feel her die." Oriana is the one who passes the blade to Theodora. A ritual dagger, its edge glowing faintly. The memory was so vivid that Isolde stumbled, her hand flying to the scars on her throat. Theron's hand clamped down on hers instantly. He felt the spike of pure, unadulterated terror and rage that flooded the bond. It was so strong it made him dizzy. "What is it?" he whispered, his head bent low as if speaking to his servant. Isolde was shaking. She tugged on his arm, pulling him away, a clumsy servant dragging her broken to master from the hall. Back in his rooms, the door barred, she flew to the runestones. Her hands were shaking so badly she kept dropping them. "Isolde, talk to me," Theron commanded, his own control fraying. Reversal. The threat from the last chapter crystallized into pure, unbridled rage as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. She finally slammed the stones onto the table. He swept his hand over them. She was there. She gave him the dagger. The one that scarred me. Chapter 15. The Study. 3. Theron whispered, his voice a low, lethal hum. "Magnus, Theodora, and Oriana. A conspiracy to destroy my line and take my pack." He paced the room. A caged lion. "They're arrogant. They think I'm a broken fool. You're a mute ghost. And their victory is assured. We need proof," he said. "The pack loves Magnus. They are dazzled by Oriana. My word, the word of a blind, mad alpha is not enough. And you?" He touched her scarred cheek. "They won't let you speak." Isolde pointed to the runes for Magnus in study. His study. Theron nodded. "He's grown arrogant. He must have kept something. A journal. The magic he used. The dagger. The pack council meets in 1 hour. He will be there trying to convince them to force the marriage," Theron said. "His study will be empty. You have to go." Isolde's blood ran cold. But she nodded. She was the only one who could. She was invisible. A servant. She slipped out of his rooms, her heart a drum. She kept to the servants' halls, her movements silent. She reached his study. The guards posted outside were new, loyal to Magnus, but they ignored her. She was just the mute drudge, carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies. She slipped inside. The room was opulent, dark wood and rich leather. It smelled of sandalwood and lies. She didn't have much time. She went to the desk as Theron had suggested. She ran her hands along the smooth, polished wood just as he would have. Think like him. Feel. Don't look. Her fingers found it. A small, almost imperceptible line in the ornate carving. A loose panel. A false bottom. Reversal. The rage from the last chapter was channeled into knife-edge suspense. She pried it open. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a small, iron-banded box. It was locked. She was fumbling with the lock, her cleaning pick in hand, when she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, confident, and early. The council meeting was over. Magnus was returning. Chapter 16. The Escape. Isolde's heart stopped. She didn't hesitate. She slid the panel back into place, grabbed her bucket, and dove. She threw herself behind the thick, heavy curtains by the window, the same place Theron had hidden her. She pressed her back against the cold stone, praying her scent, her fear, wouldn't betray her. The door opened. Click. She heard Magnus enter. Thump. Thump. He stopped. The silence in the room was absolute. She heard him, just as Theron would have. She heard the soft shush of his robes. And then she heard him sniff the air. Who was in here? He whispered to himself. Her heart was a cannon in her chest. He knows. He knows. He knows. He walked the room. She heard his boots on the rug. He was agitated. He was suspicious. He was walking closer, closer. He was at the desk. She heard the scrape of his ring on the wood. He was checking the panel. He was moving again, coming right toward the curtains. Isolde squeezed her eyes shut, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a non-existent scream. He reached for the curtain. Alpha Magnus! A guard's voice, sharp and urgent, from the doorway. Magnus froze. What is it? He snapped, his voice sharp with irritation. An urgent message from the Border Patrol, my lord. They've captured a rogue. I'll be right there. The footsteps retreated. The door clicked shut. He was gone. Reversal. The agonizing suspense was broken by the sheer, heart-stopping luck of near discovery. Isolde waited for a full minute, her body shaking, before she slipped out and fled. She burst into Theron's rooms, breathless, nearly collapsing against the barred door. Theron was by the fire, but he turned as she entered. He knows, he said. It wasn't a question. I can smell his suspicion from here. He's on high alert. He'll be moving the box. Chapter 17. The Proof. We have no time, Theron said, his voice a blade. He'll destroy the evidence. I have to create a diversion, a real one. You must get that box. Now. He moved to his own door and roared, his full alpha command shaking the walls. Alden! The beta was there in seconds. Alpha? A rogue scent. At the east border, Magnus's patrol missed it. I smell it on the wind. Send a full patrol, now. Alden, startled by Theron's sudden command, didn't question. He just ran. The diversion created chaos. Guards were shouting, bells were ringing. Magnus would be drawn to the command center. Go, Theron ordered Isolde. Run. She flew. The halls were chaos, which was the perfect cover. She reached the study. It was empty, just as he'd predicted. She slid open the panel. The box was still there. She grabbed it. It was small, but heavy. She tucked it under her rough-spun dress and ran, not back to his rooms, but to the kitchens. She dumped her bucket, then took the servants' stairs, just another drudge on an errand. She reached his rooms. He had the door barred. You have it, he breathed, smelling the old iron and the faint magic clinging to it. Break it, she spelled with the runes, her hands shaking. He didn't need a key. He placed the box on the hearth and brought his fist down. The old wood splintered, the iron lock snapping. Reversal. The near discovery was finally converted to cold, hard fury. He plunged his hands inside. His fingers, so sensitive, identified the objects by touch. A thick bundle of letters tied in silk. He smelled Oriana's cloying perfume on them. A small glass bottle corked. He opened it. Scent. The unmistakable sharp tang of magical accelerant. The kind that burns hot enough to melt stone. And at the bottom, something else. A chain. His fingers closed around it. He lifted it. He didn't need to see. He felt it. A small moon opal pendant, carved with the Storm Rider crest. He had given it to Isolde the night before the attack. He had clasped it around her neck himself. This was Magnus's trophy. He closed his fist around it, the stone cutting into his palm. The proof. It's time, Theron whispered, his voice devoid of all emotion save a terrifying, cold calm. We set the trap. Chapter 18. The Trap. The week that followed was a masterclass in deception. The evidence, the damning letters, the small glass vial of accelerant, and the moon opal pendant that felt like a burning coal in Theron's hand, was secured within a loose stone in his hearth, a secret from their puphood, Outwardly, Theron sank deeper into his perceived despair. He allowed Theodora to attend him, refusing her teas but accepting her strengthening broths, which he would promptly pour onto the flagstones when she left, the scent of the faint, bitter herbs a constant reminder of the vipers he harbored. He was the broken alpha, a hollow shell, and he played the part with agonizing precision. The day of the full moon loomed. He called a formal pack council. Isolde was there, a shadow in the corner of the grand council chamber. She stood by the tapestry, her tray of refreshments untouched. She was invisible. She was the perfect spy. Theron slumped in his high-backed chair, his ceremonial robes hanging loosely on his frame. "My alpha," Magnus began, his voice a rich, sympathetic baritone that coated the room like oil. "We have gathered as you requested." He paused, letting the silence stretch, amplifying Theron's weakness. "We are all concerned, Theron. The pack feels adrift. It needs a Luna. It needs strength." Theron heard the subtle shift of the council members in their chairs, the sound of their agreement, the scent of their communal anxiety. Theron let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of utter defeat he had practiced for days. "You are right, Uncle." His voice was a monotone, a dead thing. Isolde watched as the other members of the council exchanged glances of pity. Magnus's scent changed. The sandalwood base was suddenly sharpened by a spike of triumph. It was the smell of a wolf closing its jaws on its prey. Theron heard the minuscule, almost imperceptible intake of breath from his uncle. I cannot lead them alone," Theron whispered, the words sounding as if they were being ripped from his throat. "I am not the man I was." "My boy, none of us blame you," Magnus said, stepping forward, placing a proprietary hand on Theron's shoulder. The touch felt like a brand, and it took all of Theron's will not to flinch. "It is a burden no one should bear alone. Lady Oriana is a fine, strong alpha in her own right. An alliance—" "Yes," Theron interrupted, his voice hollow. "An alliance. She is strong. She will be the light the pack needs, since I have none." "A wise decision, Theron," Magnus boomed, turning to the council. His voice was a performance full of false nobility. "You see, your alpha's heart is still true to his people. He puts the pack first. You honor us all, my lord." "Then, so be it," Theron whispered. "Let it be done. The full moon. Arrange it." He waved a trembling, dismissive hand. "Leave me, I must rest." The council filed out, their sense a mixture of relief and lingering pity. Magnus was the last to leave. He squeezed Theron's shoulder again. "You have made the right choice, my boy," Magnus murmured, his voice now a low, conspiratorial purr. "You will see. This is a new beginning. I will have the ceremonial wine prepared myself, only the finest vintage for my alpha. A celebration of your new life." He left. The heavy door thudded shut. Isolde moved from the shadows, her presence a silent comfort. She came to his side, her small, work-roughened hand covering his. Reversal. The cold, hard fury from their discovery of the proof had now settled into a mask of grim, chilling resolve. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Theron turned his hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "He is drowning in his own arrogance," he whispered. "It's time to let him sink." He brought her hand to his lips. "The ceremony. He will have me guarded, attended. I will need someone to serve the ceremonial wine." Isolde's hand trembled. She knew what he was asking. "Magnus will assume it will be a high-ranking pack member. Alden, perhaps," Theron continued, his voice cold. "But I will insist on the mute. The one who knows my ways. The one who is no threat. He will see it as my final pathetic act of clinging to the past." Isolde met his unseeing eyes, her own filled with a terrifying, beautiful strength. She picked up a single rune stone from the pouch at her belt. The one for danger. She then placed it firmly in his palm and closed his fingers around it. It was not a question. It was a vow. She would be the one to hand the traitors the cup. Chapter 19. The Ceremony. The great hall of the Storm Riders pack had not been this full in over a year. Torches blazed in their sconces, casting wild dancing shadows that lapped at the high-beamed ceiling. The full moon, a perfect cold silver disk, streamed through the high windows, bathing the central dais in an ethereal, otherworldly light. It was a perfect night for a binding, or an execution. The scent of the pack was a heavy, complex tapestry in the air, a physical weight that Theron could taste. He smelled their anticipation, their confusion, their anxiety, and beneath it all, the sharp, sour tang of their pity. They were here to watch their broken alpha be handed over, like a prize, to a new, strong female. Theron stood on the dais, his face a mask of weary, tragic resignation. He was dressed in the heavy ceremonial robes of his station, the silver wolf's head clasp cold and heavy on his chest. Every touch of the unfamiliar silk against his skin felt like a lie. Beside him, Lady Oriana was a vision in white silk and diamonds, her night-blooming jasmine perfume a cloying, suffocating fog. To Theron's hypersensitive nose, it was the smell of rot hidden beneath two sweet flowers. Her sound was a constant, tinkling laugh as she accepted congratulations from nobles, a sound like breaking glass. At the foot of the dais, Magnus stood as officiant, his own robes of state making him look every bit the proud, benevolent patriarch. He beamed at the assembled crowd, his scent a reek of sandalwood and smug satisfaction. Isolde was a ghost. She stood in the deepest shadows just off the dais, her rough-spun, dun-colored servant's dress a stark contrast to the finery. Her tray, polished to a high sheen, held a single ornate flagon and the heavy silver chalice of binding. Her heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. She was terrified, not for herself, for Theron, for this one, desperate chance. So much could go wrong. "We are gathered," Magnus's voice boomed, silencing the hall. It was a performance, full of false gravitas and practiced emotion. "We are gathered under the luna's holy light to join two great lines, to heal our beloved pack, to give our noble Alpha Theron, a man who has suffered so much, a new light in his darkness." Oriana preened, her smile radiant, her hand resting on Theron's arm. The touch of her fingers, her sharp nails, made his skin crawl. The pack murmured, a low rumble of approval. They wanted this. They wanted to be healed. "It is time," Magnus declared, his voice dropping to a solemn tone. "Let the ceremonial wine be brought forth, a symbol of their union, a new bond for a new future." Reversal. The grim resolve of their plan now twisted into an agonizing, suffocating high tension. This was it. The play was in motion. Isolde stepped forward. She felt the hundreds of pairs of eyes lock onto her. She heard the whispers ripple through the crowd like a grass fire. The mute? Why her? An attendant? To serve the sacred chalice? A bad omen. A broken servant for a broken alpha. She kept her eyes down. Her feet, bare on the cold stone, were steady. She had walked through fire. She could walk through this. She approached Magnus. He looked down at her, his expression one of faint, dismissive contempt. Theodora, the healer, stood near him, her face a mask of cold indifference. The old woman lifted the flagon. Theron smelled it from 10 feet away, the bitter almond of aconite lacing the fruity wine, and poured a deep, ruby-red stream into the chalice. Isolde took the heavy cup. Her hands did not shake. She turned and began the slow, final walk to the dais, to Theron. As she passed Lady Oriana, the woman's smile was a triumphant, predatory slash. Oriana leaned in, her perfumed scent a wave of poison, her voice a tinkling, melodic bell of pure malice, meant only for Isolde to hear. "Such a pity you survived the fire, little mouse. It doesn't matter. He'll be dead by morning. The poison is slow. They'll all think his broken heart finally gave out in his sleep. And then, I'll have Magnus get rid of all the broken, useless things, starting with you. You'll be next." Chapter 20. The Accusation. Isolde's step faltered. Just for a heartbeat. The casual, cruel confirmation of their plan was a wave of icy sickness that stole her breath. He'll be dead by morning. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the chalice, to expose them, to kill them. But she didn't. She remembered the plan. She remembered Theron's hand in hers. "Trust me." She continued her measured walk. She reached the dais. She stood before her mate, the man she loved, and held the poisoned chalice up to him. The hall was silent. This was the moment of binding. Theron's hand, in its heavy ceremonial glove, was trembling as he reached for the cup. He looked so weak, so defeated. Isolde's heart broke for the part he had to play. He took the chalice. His fingers brushed hers, a silent, electric touch of reassurance. He raised the cup. "A toast," he said. His voice was hesitant, weak, thick with a grief that the pack mistook for mourning his lost mate, but was in reality a deep, cold rage. He brought the cup to his face, his blind eyes turned toward the crowd, and he paused. He held it there, his head tilted, as if listening. The silence in the hall was absolute, a held breath. He inhaled, a long, slow, deep and audible breath. "It smells," he said, his voice soft, contemplative, "of wolfsbane." The silence in the hall was no longer respectful. It was a sharp, stunned, electric vacuum. Oriana's smile twitched, frozen on her face. Magnus's face went rigid. "Theron, my boy," Magnus began, forcing a nervous paternal laugh. "Your senses they are playing tricks on you. It is the finest vintage from the south, I told you, from my own cellars." "It smells of bitter almonds," Theron interrupted, his voice growing stronger, clearer, cutting through Magnus's bluster. "The same faint bitter almond I have been smelling in my healing tea for months. The tea you prescribed, Theodora." He turned his head, his unseeing eyes seeming to pin the healer where she stood. She took an involuntary step back, her face draining of color, her hands twisting in the folds of her robes. "Alpha, you are unwell," Theodora rasped, her voice a dry rustle. "The grief, it creates phantoms. He is mad." Lady Oriana's tinkling voice was no longer melodic. It was a sharp, shrill, panicked shriek that echoed off the stones. "He is blind and mad. He is ruining our ceremony. He is defiling our union." "Magnus!" she shrieked, her mask of beauty cracking, revealing the raw ambition beneath. "Stop this! Stop him! He is unfit!" Magnus raised his hands, his face a mask of deep, sorrowful concern. It was a brilliant performance. "My friends, my pack, please! Your Alpha is confused. The grief, the trauma, it has broken his mind. He doesn't know what he's saying." The hall erupted. Confused shouts, gasps of horror. The pack was turning, looking at each other, their pity warring with a new, dawning, terrible suspicion. "I am blind!" Theron's voice was not a shout. It was a roar, the full, unbridled Alpha command that he had not used in over a year. The sound was a physical weight, a blast of pure power that shattered the chaos, slamming every wolf in the hall into stunned, primal silence. He stood tall. The broken man was gone. In his place stood the Alpha, his power a visible, shimmering aura in the moonlight, his chest heaving, not with weakness, but with a rage that had been tempered for a year. Reversal. The agonizing tension snapped, like a breaking bone, into pure, electrifying, terrifying shock. He turned his head slowly, his blind eyes seeming to pin his uncle to the stone floor. "I am blind, uncle, but I am not deaf." Chapter 21. The Luna Speaks. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more profound than any sound. It was the silence of a pack awaiting judgment. "I am not deaf," Theron repeated, his voice now a low, lethal hum that vibrated through the stone dais. "I heard your congratulations, Magnus. I heard the slick, gloating triumph in your voice when you thought you had sealed my fate and secured your new puppet." He turned his head, a fractional, terrifying movement toward Oriana, who was frozen, her hand half raised. "I heard your whisper just now, Lady Oriana. As my mate, my attendant, passed you." He repeated her words, his voice a cold, cruel mimicry of her tinkling tone. "He'll be dead by morning. You'll be next." Oriana's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She hadn't just been heard. She had been heard by him. Her words, spoken in the arrogance of her assumed victory, were now a death sentence. "And Theron continued, his voice dropping. "I was not alone in what I heard." He reached out his hand, not to Oriana, not to the chalice, but into the shadows beside him. His hand found Isolde's. He gripped it, and he pulled her. He pulled her from the shadows, out of her invisible life and into the center of the dais, into the silver spotlight of the full moon. He pulled her to his side, his arm locking around her waist, claiming her. The pack gasped as one. "What is this?" Magnus roared, his mask of concern shattering, revealing the first cracks of raw panic. He's mad. He anoints a mute, scarred kitchen drudge. He brings this nothing into a sacred binding. He defiles his own ceremony. She is no drudge, Theron said, his voice soft, but it carried deadly and clear to every corner of the silent hall. She is the woman you left for dead. He held her hand up, the moonlight catching the crescent scar on her arm. This is Isolde, my fated mate, my Luna, the Luna you tried to murder. A tidal wave of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror washed over the pack. This was impossible. This was madness. Lady Isolde was dead. Her ashes were in the crypt. Lies, Magnus howled, his voice cracking, his control finally snapping. A pathetic, convenient lie. A desperate fantasy. The girl is a mute. She cannot even speak her own name. She is an impostor you are using to cover your own insanity. She is mute, Theron agreed, his voice dangerously calm, his grip tightening on Isolde's hand. Because your pet healer, Theodora, took a blade to her throat. Because you gave the order. The one I heard you give a year ago in the fire. The one you thought I was too weak to remember. He turned to Isolde, his unseeing eyes full of a trust so absolute, so powerful it was a physical force. But you heard him too, didn't you, my love? He looked at her, his alpha, his mate. Tell them, Isolde. Tell them what you heard. All eyes, hundreds of pairs of eyes, locked onto the small, scarred woman. She was trembling, her hand gripping Theron's as if it were the only solid thing in the universe. She looked at Magnus, at his face, now twisted with a rictus of rage and fear. She looked at Oriana, who was shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no." This was it. The terror of a year. The silence. The hiding. The lye soap and the cold floors. It all came down to this single, impossible moment. She put her free hand to her throat, to the nest of raised, ropey scars that had been her cage. She felt the eyes of the pack, not with pity now, but with a desperate, hungry need. She took a breath. It was a raw, ragged, painful sound like dry leaves scraping stone. She pushed. She forced the air past the ruined landscape of her throat, past the tissue that had been sliced and burned and cursed. Reversal. The shock of the accusation, the tension of the reveal, finally gave way to a moment of pure, earth-shattering vindication. A sound tore from her lips. It was not a word. It was a croak, a broken, tearing, agonizing noise. Magnus laughed. A high, hysterical, relieved sound. "You see? Nothing. A broken toy." "Tell them!" Theron commanded, not in anger but in faith. Isolde closed her eyes. She focused on the bond, the silver wire of pure love and shared rage that connected her to Theron. She opened her mouth. She pushed with her soul. "Traitor!" The word was not a whisper. It was not a croak. It was a raw, guttural, broken shout. It was the sound of a lock shattering, of a grave being torn open, of a year of agony given a voice. It echoed in the stunned, absolute silence of the hall. The pack gasped as one. Magnus and Oriana's faces were no longer just horrified. They were convicted. Chapter 22. The fight. Magnus's civilized mask didn't just crack, it incinerated. The primal, cornered, rabid wolf beneath exploded to the surface. His mind snapped. "You should have died!" he screamed, his voice a shriek that ripped through the silence. "I killed you! I killed you both!" His confession, a full-throated public admission, hung in the air for a single damning heartbeat. Then he moved. With a speed that belied his age, his hand flew to the ceremonial dagger at his belt, the same jewel-encrusted blade he had intended to use on Theron, Isolde now realized, the one Oriana had given Theodora. He lunged, not at Isolde, the source of his unmaking, but at Theron, the target he had missed a year ago. "You were always weak!" he roared, his blade slicing through the air, aimed not at the chest but at the throat. He would finish the job Theodora had started. The pack screamed. Oriana shrieked. Isolde's heart stopped, her hand flying to her own scarred throat in a mirror of his intended attack. Theron didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply stood, his head tilted, his body a coiled spring, listening. The attack was not a mystery to him. It was a song. He heard the whistle of the blade cutting the air, a high, thin sheen. He heard the scuff of Magnus's leather boot on the stone, the sound of his weight shifting. He smelled the sudden, pungent, coppery scent of Magnus's adrenaline-soaked fear sweat, a smell of panic and killing intent. He felt the air shift, a whisper of displaced wind across his cheek, a tenth of a second before the blade could arrive. At the last possible nanosecond, Theron moved. It was not the clumsy stumble of a blind man. It was the fluid, precise, devastating pivot of a master. He didn't step back, which Magnus would have anticipated. He stepped into the attack. Magnus, his entire body committed to the lunge, was expecting to meet the soft flesh of Theron's throat. Instead, he met Theron's iron-hard forearm. Thwack! The sound of Theron's arm blocking Magnus's wrist was a sickening, hard sound. But Theron wasn't done. He didn't grab. He didn't wrestle. With his other hand, he struck. A sharp, open-palmed blow to the precise nerve cluster at Magnus's elbow. Magnus roared, a sound of pure agony as his entire arm went numb, his fingers spasming open. Clatter. The dagger spun, flashing in the moonlight, and clattered loud and final on the stone dais. In one smooth, unbroken motion, Theron spun, using Magnus's own forward momentum against him. He hooked his leg behind Magnus's, clamped his hand on the back of his neck, and slammed him face down onto the dais with a crash that shook the chalice. He pinned him there, one hand crushing the back of his neck, his knee in the man's spine. The entire confrontation took less than 3 seconds. The hall was silent, struck dumb by the shocking, lethal, predatory competence of the Alpha they had all dismissed as a broken relic. Reversal. The vindication of Isolde's words. Her single, powerful shout exploded into a moment of pure, breathtaking triumph. Theron stood over his uncle, his chest heaving, his wolf finally and truly in control. He leaned down, his voice a low, perilous growl for only Magnus to hear, though the entire pack felt its vibration. I am not weak, uncle. I was just grieving. Chapter 23, Justice. Alden! Theron roared, his alpha command, his real command echoing with absolute authority. His beta, his face a mask of white-hot shock and dawning, furious understanding, was the first to move. He had been loyal, but confused. Now, he was enraged. Guards, seize him! Seize them all! Storm Riders, pack guards, their loyalty to their true alpha snapping back into sharp, immediate focus, surged forward. 2 guards grabbed Magnus, hauling his struggling, defeated body up from the dais. He was spitting, cursing, his noble face a mask of pure, feral hate. You'll regret this. The pack is weak. I was making it strong. You were poisoning it, Alden snarled, striking him across the face. 2 other guards moved on Oriana. She had crumpled into a weeping, hysterical mess. Her white silk dress pooled around her. She fought, her nails scratching, her tinkling voice now a raw shriek. No, I am Lady Oriana. You can't touch me. It was his idea. All his. The last 2 guards approached Theodora. The old healer had not moved. She stood perfectly still, her hands folded, her face a mask of cold, impassive defeat. She offered her wrists for the chains without a word. It's a lie. A trick! Magnus howled, still fighting, his eyes wild. You have no proof. It's the word of a madman and a mute whore against me, the man who held this pack together. Proof? Theron's voice was cold iron. He reached into his own robe, his hand going to the hidden pocket he had sewn himself. He pulled out the moon opal pendant. He held it up, the chain dangling from his fingers. The moonlight caught the stone, and it seemed to glow with a sick, pale light. A captured ghost. Do you recognize this, uncle? Theron asked, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You should. You took it from my mate's neck after you ordered her throat cut. You kept it as a trophy of your perfect crime. That was the final blow. The pack knew that pendant. It had been Theron's mother's. It was the Luna's sigil. The pack's last shred of doubt didn't just vanish. It was obliterated, replaced by a low, unified, animalistic growl. It was the sound of 100 wolves, united in their rage. This was not just an attack on their alpha. It was a betrayal of the pack, of their past, of their future. Reversal. The white-knuckled triumph of the fight settled into the deep, grim, and absolute satisfaction of relief and justice. Take them to the cells, Theron commanded. The council will decide their fate at dawn. As the guards dragged the 3 traitors away, their curses, Magnus, sobs, Oriana, and silence, Theodora, echoing down the hall, Theron turned. The hall was silent, the pack watching him with a new, profound awe. He was not just their leader. He was their alpha, reborn. He was still just an outline of sounds and scents, but he knew exactly where she was. He reached out and pulled Isolde to his side, his arm wrapping around her waist, claiming her, showing her to the entire pack. "My Luna," he said, his voice now quiet for her alone. "You are home." She looked up at him, her beautiful, scarred face streaked with tears of terror and relief. Her hand came up to touch his jaw, her fingers tracing the strong line of his face, as if seeing him for the first time. She took a breath, her throat working. "Theron," she whispered. It was raw. It was broken. It was the first time he had heard her say his name. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Chapter 24. The Healing. Dawn came, not with a sentence, but with a confirmation. The council, led by a stone-faced Alden, was unanimous. The evidence was overwhelming. The pendant, the love letters from Oriana to Magnus plotting their new life as rulers of a merged pack, the vial of magical accelerant, and Isolde's own living, breathing, speaking testimony. They were not given the mercy of a quick death. Death was an end to suffering. They were sentenced to the unnaming. In a cold dawn ritual, they were stripped of their rank, their names, and their very connection to the pack's spirit. A new healer, a wise old woman named Amorous, was called to perform the ritual. She marked them with a silver, magically infused brand, the sigil of the traitor, a broken circle. This mark would not fade, and it would scream their betrayal to any other shifter, any other pack they ever encountered. They were banished, cast out, and exiled to the barren lands, a place where rogues and madmen tore each other apart for scraps. A fate, the pack agreed, that was far worse than death. The pack had their justice. Theron and Isolde, however, needed to heal. That afternoon, Amorous came to their chambers. The heavy, dark curtains had been torn down, and the bright, clear light of day filled the room. Amorous's scent was not of bitter herbs, but of sage and clean rain, a deep comfort. "May I, my Luna?" she asked, her voice soft. Isolde sat, her hands in Theron's, and nodded. Amoros's touch was light, her fingers probing the scarred landscape of Isolde's throat. Theron listened to the gentle probing, his heart tight. "The blade was cruel," Amoros said finally, her voice full of a quiet sadness. "But it was not just a blade. It was magic, a curse tied to the steel." Theron, sitting by Isolde, his hand gripping hers, went rigid. "Can you heal it?" "The blade did its physical damage," Amoros explained, her gentle fingers tracing the largest scar. "Her voice will always be as it is, raw, husky, a little broken." She smiled gently at Isolde, a smile Theron could hear in her voice. "A beautiful, unique sound. A reminder of your strength, not your weakness," she continued. "But the curse, that was different. It was blood magic, tied to the blade and to her fear. It was designed to feed on her silence. The longer she was mute, the stronger the curse became, literally sealing her vocal cords with dark magic. It was meant to last as long as she believed she was broken, as long as she was afraid to be found. And what broke it? Theron asked, though his wolf already knew. "You did," Amoros said, looking at them both. "When you claimed her publicly in front of the entire pack, when you gave her your strength, your belief, and when she," Amoros's gaze on Isolde was one of deep respect, "made the choice to speak. She chose to tear her own voice from the curse's grip. It must have been agony. That single word, traitor, was an act of war. The bond, the true mate bond, is stronger than any dark magic. Love, Alpha, is the oldest and most powerful cure. Reversal." The grim, bloody justice of the morning finally melted away, replaced by a profound, healing, deep joy. After Amoros left, they were alone for the first time as themselves, not as master and servant, not as the hidden and the hunted, but as mates. "Theron," Isolde whispered, her new, husky voice an intimate sound in the quiet room. "My love," he breathed, pulling her from her chair and into his lap, his arms wrapping around her as if he would never let go. "I have missed your voice for so long." "And I," she said, her fingers tracing his face, his jaw, the small scar over his eyebrow he'd gotten from a wolf trap as a boy. "I have missed everything. I was so afraid, for so long." "Never again," he vowed, his hand covering hers, his thumb stroking her palm. "We are never hiding again. Not from them, not from anyone." She smiled, A small, beautiful smile that he felt in the way her muscles shifted and the sound of her soft exhale. And then, for the first time in over a year, she laughed. It was not a tinkling false sound like Oriana's. It was a low, throaty, husky sound, as raw and real and beautifully broken as her voice. It was the sound of life, of a soul uncaged. Theron's heart, the stone in his chest that had been his companion for a year, finally, completely, dissolved. He leaned in, his fingers finding the scars on her face, on her throat. He traced them with reverence, not with horror. They were a map of her survival. They were a testament to her strength. "I have never seen you, my Isolde," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion so deep it ached. "Not your hair, not your eyes, not these marks of your victory, but you are the most beautiful thing I have ever known." Chapter 25. The Future. The Full Hea. 1 year later, the great hall of the Storm Riders pack was filled not with tension or fear, but with the warm, rich scent of baking bread, roasting meats, and the clean smell of peace. The pack was thriving. Alpha Theron stood at the head of the council table, not on a dais, but among his people. His blindness was his greatest strength. He didn't just lead. He listened. "Councilman Soren," Theron said, his voice calm, "your proposal for the new trade route is excellent, but you are holding something back." The hall went quiet. Soren, a wolf from a minor bloodline, stammered. "Alpha, I don't know what you mean." "Your heartbeat," Theron said simply. "It skipped when you mentioned the river crossing. You smell of anxiety. You're afraid of the Bayou packs. Tell me the truth." Soren deflated, then confessed his fears. The council worked with him, not against him. This was the new way. Theron heard the truth. He smelled intent. He felt the pulse of his pack, and he led them with a deep, profound wisdom that sight could never have provided. Isolde, his Luna, sat beside him, not as a shadow, but as his partner. Her scars were visible, a proud testament to her survival, not her shame. Her voice, though still raw and husky, was one of command and deep compassion. She ran the pack's internal affairs, her own near-death experience making her a fierce protector of the weak and the overlooked. She was the pack's heart, as he was its strength. A high-pitched shriek of pure, unadulterated laughter cut through the din of the hall. "Mama! Papa! Kale is pulling my hair!" A small, dark-haired girl, no more than 3 years old, ran through the hall, weaving between the legs of their pack members. She was followed by a slightly smaller boy, his hair a mirror of hers, clutching a wooden wolf. "Zarya!" Isolde laughed, her voice full of joy. "Be nice to your brother." Theron smiled, turning his head, listening to the patter of their small feet on the stone. He knelt, his arms open. He didn't need to see. He heard the pitter-patter of his daughter, smelled her scent of milk and summer grass, and just a hint of trouble. She launched herself into his chest. "Papa!" she squealed, patting his face with her small, jam-sticky hands. "Kale is a rogue!" "He is not a rogue, little Storm," Theron murmured, burying his face in her hair. "He is just your brother." He reached out, his hand finding Kale's small head, and ruffled his hair, pulling his son into the embrace. Reversal. The deep joy of their healing, the start of their new life, had blossomed into a complete, chaotic, and perfect future. Later that night, the hall was quiet. The pups were asleep in their cradles, their scents a warm, sleepy anchor in the room. Theron and Isolde stood on the balcony of their chambers, the same balcony where he had once stood, a broken beast in an endless darkness. The air was clean, scented with pine from the high forests and the smell of wood smoke from the village. The pack was safe. The pack was whole. Isolde leaned against him, her head on his chest. He could hear the strong, steady, peaceful thump-thump of her heart. "It's a good life, Theron," she whispered, her unique, husky voice a song in the dark. "I love you." He smiled, pulling her closer, his hand coming to rest over her heart. He didn't need to see the moon. He didn't need to see her face. His world was full of sound and scent and touch, and it was perfect. "I know," he replied, his voice full of a peace he had once thought impossible. "I can hear it in your heartbeat."